Shepard, how you doing?
Hi. Good to
Thanks
see
for
you.
your question. We will.
Glad to join you.
Well, thank you. We'll start with your question too, Steve. So we'll give it just another minute for others to join. But thank you all. This is the monthly AHC New England technical call, and hopefully you'll find this enjoyable time to get as many of you I know are prepping to have your cars ready for Summit 2021. I do have the logo behind me for Healey's at Newport. So if you're not speaking, if you wouldn't mind putting your phone or computer on mute, that would be best to minimize any background noise or anything of that sort. So that would be great. But again, we do have about half a dozen questions that people have emailed in advance. Again, if there are questions that people are interested in during the course of the call today, please let us know, and we'll be happy to get those in as well. So I would also like to start off very excited about is we do have a new member of our expert team, Mike Salter. And some of you have heard Mike before on these calls in the past. Mike has extensive Austin-Healey experience. You may notice a bit of an accent from Mike. So he brings an international exposure as it relates to the Healey mark as well. Mike lives in Ontario, and he will also be coming down for Summit. We got a total of a dozen cars planned to come down for Summit 2021. So we're excited about that. So Mike, do you want to just introduce yourself a bit about some of your history with the Austin-Healey mark, and that you'll now be participating as one of our quote unquote experts?
Can you hear me?
We can. Thanks, Mike.
Great. Yeah, sure. I used to have a business called Precision Sports Cars in Toronto, and it specialized in Austin-Healey's. I ran it for 22 years, and I actually started restoring my first Austin-Healey in 1973, and it was a 64 BJ8 phase 1. And I've been around these cars ever since. Have graduated to particularly enjoying the early 100s. That's been my thing, but I still have a sort of a semi-professional parts business as I try to dispose of the inventory that the business accumulated in the years.
Great.
That's me.
Well, good. Well, thanks for joining us officially, Mike, and we look forward to your feedback and impact as it relates to this group. So, for those of you who may be new to these calls, we've been doing this now. This is our 4th year. I would say it's really probably gained the most momentum since COVID, because obviously many of us were not able to get out and see one another. And so it's been very successful over the past 2 years. And we do plan to continue to operate this for the foreseeable future. We believe we are now getting members because Rick Neville's very active with our Facebook page. So we do get people coming from outside of New England as well that have input as it relates to also. So we do, Dutcha is on our call, who's our newsletter editor and publisher of the Healey exhaust notes for AHCA New England. And so she does also keep track of that. And we publish summaries as it relates to that in the Healey exhaust notes in future months, as well as this recording of this event is on our YouTube channel. So we get that as well. So let's jump into our first question. So Steve Shepherdson has a question. He has a BJ8 and he's been having some challenges with his voltage regulator. And he's gone through 3 voltage regulators. And I believe, Steve, you said in the last year. So you just want to give us a little update in terms of the symptoms and what you experience when you lose the voltage regulator, Steve.
Well, what happens is the red light goes on showing that the generator is not charging the battery, and it's running on battery, and that drains the battery so that when you get to where you're going, you can't start it the next time you try. So this is the voltage regulator was replaced on March 1st, and then again on June 17th. And both times the voltage regulator failed, and I just had it replaced 2 days ago. And it'll work for a while, but I expect it'll happen again. They've checked the generator. They've checked the entire electrical system. I've had it looked at by mechanics in Los Angeles, where I had the car last winter, and in New York State. And so it's happened with two very good mechanics. So I just don't know what the problem is, and they don't know either.
And Steve, have you been sourcing these voltage regulators? Have you
I'm
been
sorry?
sourcing these? Have you been sourcing the voltage regulators from the same supplier?
Well, in the first case, it was done in Los Angeles, and he told me on the phone the other day that he got it from Moss Motors. And the one, I've been using a mechanic in Briarcliff Manor in New York, and he got it from his local supplier. So it is apparently not the same supplier.
Okay.
And both mechanics said that these regulators are not high quality, but that they'd never seen this happen so frequently in a Healy before. So I'm a bit mystified, which is why I'm asking.
Yeah, no, I'd never heard of it either, but I'd be happy to, anyone else on the call experience issues with voltage regulators going out multiple times?
Yeah, when I had a
Oh.
regulator on my BJ8 done, I had sports car specialties up in Vermont do it. That was quite a few years ago, but they had to put two or three on the car to get one that worked. They commented about how poorly they're made. And, basically any electrical component that we put on our car, a generator or anything like that, you really have to sort through the pile to find one that's good. At least that's the way it was back then.
Okay, thanks, Robert.
I'd agree with what Robert just said. I've had 3 or 4 in mine. Once the original one went, that was it. Once I started buying aftermarket ones, and that's what they said, the quality of them is not up to snuff. So now I've had one in there now for a year and a half, and it's been fine. So I'll knock on wood, as they say, and hope it continues that way.
Now, I do carry a spare voltage regulator in my car. So, Steve, I've never experienced losing 3 in less than 6 months. Bob, Mike, any feedback from you as it relates to thoughts as it relates to these voltage regulators?
I have one question. These are, of course, the later 3-bobbin regulators. Is that correct in all cases?
I'm sorry, they're what?
Are these the later BJ8 style 3-bobbin regulators?
Yeah, I think so.
And
Steve, we're getting a lot of echo on your phone, Steve, just to let you know.
Yeah, that's problems. I don't quite know what to do about it.
Do you have 2 devices up at the same time, Steve, side by side or near each other?
Let me get off of this.
Are you on like your iPhone and your computer at the same time? That's what we may be doing it, Steve.
Okay.
Can
How's
you hear
that?
me? Sorry.
Much better.
Are these generators being polarized after fitting the regulators?
Are the generators being polarized? I don't know. I'm sure I know what that means even.
Okay. When you install anything in the electrical charging system in these cars, it's really important to polarize the generator before running the new component. And all that consists of doing is applying a 12-volt power source to the small terminal of the generator. And it just makes sure that the generator is, the residual magnetism in the generator is polarized correctly. Otherwise, the generator can actually charge in reverse. That is, it can charge positive to negative and negative to positive. So that's one thing that I would suggest should be checked every time you put a new regulator on.
Well, I'll have to ask the mechanic whether he did that. I didn't get into that detail with him. He said that he checked the generator, so.
Yeah, you can test the generator, and the generator will still test okay, and it will put out voltage in both the unload and load conditions, but it can still be backwards. So it is important to polarize before you go any further.
Okay, I'll ask him.
And Steve, where is the car right now?
It's in North Salem, New York, which is close to Ridgefield, Connecticut.
Okay, so it's in the area right now. Okay, and
It's in the area.
you mentioned something about Los Angeles. So the mechanic that's worked on it most recently is in the area as well, Steve?
Yes, it's Briarcliff Classic and Imported, Bob Milstein. Some of you know him.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, and he's pretty good. He's been servicing the car for the almost 2 years that I've had it, except for the 4 months that I was using it in Los Angeles.
Okay.
So these are two very competent mechanics, so I would assume that they, did what they had to do with the generator, but I will double check. That's a good point.
The polarizing it, yes.
And I should say, Pete, that it has failed 2 times. I'm on the 3rd voltage regulator, but it hasn't yet failed the 3rd time.
Okay.
I expect it's imminent.
Okay.
I'd be
Bob
very-
Abbott, I see your picture popped up. Do you have any thoughts, Bob?
I think that Mike's points are well taken. We have experienced a lot of the modern regulators coming through and going bad. As a matter of fact, it got so bad at one time that I convinced Enon to start sending her all of her regulators out to be checked before she ships them out. So, I mean, we were just getting one after another that just didn't function very well. So,
Right.
I understand that she's having them all checked, and any of the regulators I'm getting from her now actually have, the boxes have been opened and the cosmoline has been ground off the points, been knocked off the points and cleaned up, and they will have a check mark and somebody's signature on them that they have been checked and are working correctly when they left her building. So
In the polarizing of the generator, is that something you do as well, Bob?
we have done it. Yep. Yep.
Okay.
I have another question. Does anybody actually taken those regulators apart to determine what the failure was?
Steve?
Not that I'm aware of, and when you read some of the material about voltage regulators on Healy's, they say, don't try to fix them, just replace them. And my mechanic in Briarcliff Manor said that he got a voltage regulator from his supplier and it wasn't any good and he had to get another one from him. So there seems to be an epidemic of bad voltage regulators. And everybody says the quality of these things is junk. But you're stuck with it. I don't know what else you can do.
So I think, Steve, the point that Bob Abbott was just making is he has them tested in advance by Healy surgeons, by Enon Phillips. I'm sure that's not the case anyone sourcing from Moss. So that was the reason for going down that further step, because Bob had experience even from Healy surgeons where they had problems with some of those voltage regulators. So the source of where they're coming from may be something you may want to consider as well for the future.
Yeah, well, these 2 that failed came from 2 different sources. So one was from Moss and one was from the local supplier that Bob Milstein uses. I don't know who that is.
Okay. Well, maybe checking with him regarding the polarization of the generator before he
Yeah,
installed that last.
That's a very good point. I will definitely check with him.
Okay.
Okay.
Any other thoughts for Steve or Steve, any other questions, Steve?
No, just one other thing is, if I get a spare one and keep it with me, are these things easy to replace? I looked at it and, there are about 5 or 6 wires that go into it, which looks a little tricky. You've all had experience replacing voltage regulators? Is it something that some
Voltage
lightly
regulators
skilled amateur could do?
Voltage regulators are easily replaced, and the only thing I would comment on is another point. Do have to make sure that there is a ground on the regulator. It's the last terminal on the right. I think it's marked E. It's very important to ensure that that wire is correctly grounded. Very important.
Okay.
So one of the things, Steve, I would recommend, if you do have an issue with where you have to replace one yourself, take a picture of the wires going into the existing one before you loosen anything up. So that way you'll have a point of reference when you, put the new one on. So you don't want to be, crossing wires or anything of that sort. You're right. There's, 4 or 5 or 6 terminals there. And I would take a picture so you can see all 6 of them at the same time, with your camera, so that then you can go back and refer to that when you're putting it back together.
Yeah, my mechanic said if I ever tried to replace it, he said, do 1 wire at a time.
Yep.
Take 1 wire off the old one, put it on the new one, because otherwise you'll get them confused,
Even better.
Good
I
point.
had some experience with it recently. I had one fail, a voltage regulator fail on a BJ8. My mechanic bent one of the where it holds up where the springs are. He bent it up in the air until it worked, and it worked for a while until I got a new one, and I replaced it myself. And of course, when I replaced it, what I did was write down the color of the wire on for the terminal. I just made a schematic, and it was easy to replace. I replaced it myself, and it's working fine. The other thing I'd love to have is a voltage regulator, so I could be sure that to know when when there's charging and when there's not, because my red light never went off. It always showed that it was working fine, but the battery wasn't staying up. And that I had to check it by, we found it out by, seeing if the battery was being charged above standard voltage. And so I have the same issue about MOS voltage regulators. They're not very good. And I don't think there's any other source, is there?
Well,
Does
again,
your-
Alden, as Bob Abbott talked about, Ian Phillips at Healy Surgeons is testing those before she sends them to him. Bob uses her almost exclusively. He does not use Moss.
I have a question. The one thing about these regulators is that if your ignition light is not coming on when you turn the ignition on, is that the way yours was, Alden?
No, it came on and then it went off after starting. So it said everything's fine. But
it
when
wasn't
we went
charging.
and checked at the battery to see whether the voltage was going up when you speeded up the engine, when you speed up the revolutions, the voltage was staying at normal voltage without any charging. So we knew that it wasn't putting out. But when my mechanic bent up the thing that holds them, I don't know how to describe it. The little
I
things
think
that
you're
stick out.
talking about the points, correct? The points inside the regulator.
Right, and then
Yeah.
to make the points make contact, bend it way up. Then it made contact, then it worked. But I didn't know whether, I changed it out because I wasn't sure whether it was correctly monitoring the voltage when he did that. It may have got it to work, but it may overcharge. I don't know.
You're talking about the contacts inside the regulator or the
Yes.
connector?
Inside, yes.
You
Where
take the cover off,
Took
Steve.
the cover off and he bent it up
Almost
so that the
always.
points would close.
Yeah.
Because apparently the points weren't closing.
So similar to you have on your ignition, if you're still using points, there are points inside the voltage regulator, Steve.
Okay, thank you.
Or
You're
I can
welcome.
make a comment here. On the hundreds that I restore, I've taken to actually replacing the regulators. I send the regulators to the UK and I have them converted to electronic regulators. It's a relatively expensive process, but they are very, very reliable and very accurate. They click on and off at 13.6 volts to the 100th of a volt regularly.
Who do you send it to in the UK?
Give me a minute, I'll get back to you on that.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, is it like a Age Spares or Head for Healy's or some other specialist, Mike?
No, it's not. It's actually a company that you can look it up. If you do a Google search for electronic Lucas regulator electronic conversions, this company will come out. And they're a tiny little outfit. They work out of a garage at home, but they do a fabulous job.
There was
Great.
actually a guy up in Concord, New Hampshire, who was doing the same thing. He was converting mechanical regulators to electronic units. And I've seen a schematic that he did. Unfortunately, he passed away, but I've seen the schematic that he left. And I just wish somebody locally was smarter than I was and could start producing those or converting them like Michael's found over the pond. But I don't know anybody locally that's doing that.
What do you mean by converting? What are you talking about?
Changing the mechanical regulator over to an electronic controlled regulator. It does it with circuit boards and magic rather than little bobbins that open and close.
Michael, did you say to Google under Lucas voltage regulators to
Yeah,
find
actually, if you just hang on a second, and I'm just trying to look up the name of the place. If you can give me 2 seconds, I'll be right back to you.
Thank
Great.
you.
Thanks, Michael. So, Jack, Daniel, are you on the call?
Yes,
see a
I
Jack.
am.
Hi, Jack. How you doing? Good to see you.
Good to see you guys.
Great. Well, thanks for joining. And Jack listens to these calls regularly, and he follows Bob Abbott's recommendations.
I
So
do.
He's installing a new oil pan. Now, is this a alley oil pan or is it a steel one, Jack?
It's a steel.
Okay.
A beautiful one supplied by Bob Abbott, one of the few that I've ever seen that wasn't used as a bulldozer. So thank you, Bob. I get it all painted up at Healy Green. It looks great.
And your question about
So-
the Honda Bond, how long do you let it adhere, right?
Yeah, before you fill the pan and start the car up.
Any recommendations, Bob?
I don't let it cure very long at all. Once I get it bolted on and tightened up, it might sit there overnight, but then I'm perfectly ready to put oil in the thing and get it going again.
Okay, overnight though?
Yeah,
Okay,
that's certainly ample.
all right, that's good. That's all I needed to know. You go online and there's, it's like the old joke about you get 50 rabbis and 51 opinions. So as a clergyman, I can tell that joke hopefully without anybody getting offended.
I was gonna say something about that, Jack. Did that ever come out in any of your preaching on the pulpit?
No, but a good rabbi friend told me that joke. So I say it about Baptists too, right?
That's right.
All right, that's good to know, Bob. I will do that. And you let the Honda Bond just set a little bit to get tacky before you adhere the gasket?
Just a thin little coating on there. You don't want to put too much so you get globs on the inside of the oil bath, but just a thin coating, and then once it tacks up a little bit, 5 or 6 minutes. By the time you can get it all spread on there and smoothed out, ready to go. It's ready to put up.
And then coat the top of the gasket as well, where it adheres to the engine?
That will make it more difficult to get the pan down the next time.
Okay,
I usually secure the gasket to the pan, and then I put a coat of chassis lube grease on the top side of the gasket. But you can do it with the Honda Bond as well. If I have a really bad situation where it keeps leaking on me, I'll put gasket sealer on both sides.
but it does make it harder. Hopefully I don't have to change it
Yeah,
again.
you have to pull the pan down. It sticks kind of hard, and you'll probably wreck
Okay.
the
Yeah.
gasket.
Yeah.
Break the cork. It'll tear in a couple of places when you're pulling the pan down. That's why I just
Okay.
put axle grease on a pan gasket or on a valve cover gasket.
Good. All right, Bob, that's good. Jim Began is my neighbor up here, so I have a mechanic neighbor, which has saved me a lot of anguish over the years. So, he's a
Yeah,
Now,
guy
does he
that-
make you come over and spit and polish that
Yeah.
TT7 of his?
Sometimes you won't let me drive it though, I'll tell you that.
Mike, did you have a question?
Yeah, regarding the voltage regulator conversions.
Yes.
I have found the company. It's www.dyna, DYNA regulator conversions.com.
DYNAMOR, what?
MOREGULATOR conversions.com.
Okay, Dyna, MO
Dynamo.
regulator.
It's actually dynamoregulatorconversions.com.
Got it. Dynamo regulator conversions.com.
Great.
You
Hope that works for you.
Thank you very much, Michael.
You say dynamo or binamo? What?
Dynamo regulator.
Dynamo with a D. Yes, right.
Yeah, they're
Dynamo
dynamos in England. It's only generators in America, Alden.
Okay, good.
A question for Alden. Is there a difference in setting up the regulator for positive ground versus negative ground?
No, mine, my car is still positive ground.
But I should say again, you must, if you're doing a positive negative conversion, you absolutely must polarize the generator before starting the engine.
That is if you have a conversion to negative ground.
Either way, if yours is positive ground, you're converting to negative, polarize the generator. If it's negative converting to positive, polarize the generator.
Okay, I didn't do that and it's working fine and has been for couple of months now. But I'll take your advice to be sure in the future.
Very lucky you didn't let the smoke out.
Okay, what does it do if you don't? Is it destroy the?
It literally, the regulator develops a whole lot of smoke.
Okay.
Wow.
So Alden, I wouldn't touch it. If it's not broken, don't fix it.
Leave it alone.
Everything's working fine. I wish I had a voltage regulator though, so that I could, just a voltage meter, I should say, so that I could see what's going on, you know? It's just.
I heard they're importing those to, Vermont now, Alden. You can get it. You can go down to your local parts store to get one.
A nice small one so I can tuck it up somewhere and not have to have a big hole.
I bet you could.
I can tell you, I bought a very small digital voltmeter on eBay for, I think it was all of $7 delivered. And it is fabulous and really fabulous. Just attach it under your dash and you can watch it all the time to your heart's content.
You got it online?
I got it online. I think it was about $7 or $8 delivered.
I know they're not very expensive. I have to just find one it was yours flat so that you can just tuck it and gotta glue it up under the dash.
I made up a little bracket for it, but it's not that difficult.
Yeah, I'll do that because the light drives me nuts. I just don't know what's going on.
Sure.
Yeah, so he got it on eBay, Alden.
Yeah, I'll do it.
That's where Mike found it.
Yep.
Okay. So you can Google that on eBay. So Andy, I saw you had a question. That's great. Thank you very much. So Andy's questioning as it relates to engine oil. We have talked about this before, but he was asking, does good old Castrol 2050 have enough zinc? And I think you're gonna find the answer, Andy, is no, it does not. On my 100, when I brought it over from the UK, I put in 2050, and it leaked like a sieve, and I've been using Valvoline VR1 2050 racing oil ever since, and it has reduced the leaking significantly because that does have zinc. Brad Penn, there are many different brands that have it, but as far as I know, Castrol 2050 does not, Andy.
What are other people using? What other brands besides?
I use Pengrade, and everything's working fine. And it particularly has more zinc.
I use Valvoline VR1 2050.
You don't use synthetic either, Andy. You conventional oil.
I use conventional oil and have used Castrol for years, but I guess it's time to switch. So I'm wondering what other people are using. What do you recommend?
The difficulty with engines, with oils these days, is that the manufacturers want to sell to the great unwashed. They want to sell to everybody. And if they're going to sell to everybody, they have to take ZDDP out of the oil because it poisons catalytic converters. So any oil that has high ZDDP will be marked as exclusively for racing.
So Andy, you can also buy ZDDP as an additive, but Brad Penn or Pengrade or Valvoline VR1 2050 all have ZDDP in them.
Some people in the motorcycle world have been going to diesel oils like Rotella, which, any comments on that? As they're supposedly haven't had the reductions in zinc and so forth.
I use Rotella. I've used it for about 4 years, a 1540, and because of the zinc, and it's high in zinc, and I actually use Rotella in my motorcycle too. But I use the T6 in a motorcycle because it's semi.
I've been using the Rotella also.
Any thoughts on preferred oil for differentials?
I use 8090. I use Castrol in my diff.
Okay, nothing special then?
I haven't.
Just
others recommendation for Alden?
And go back to engine oil for a minute.
Go ahead, Michael.
I'm just going through a rather traumatic experience with my own 100, where it has eaten 3 of the valve lifters after only 6,000 miles. And that was on a steady diet of VR1 non-synthetic 2050. So although you may think your engine's doing just fine on the oil you're using, unless you have a magnetic sump plug and you change the oil regularly, you probably won't know that the cam is being eaten up. I use JB Weld to weld a little rare earth magnet to the sump plugs, and whenever I change the oil, any steel that appears will appear as fuzz on that magnet, and you would be surprised how often that happens in our engines, and you don't even know it's going on.
What are
Wow.
you using for oil now?
I don't know. I'm just building this engine. I don't know
do you
what
have-
I'm going to do. Probably, what is it, Royal Purple? I think that was Mike Orritz's suggestion. He's been using that for many years racing, and I tend to respect his opinions.
So Mike, is that, do you have an aluminum head on yours or a steel head?
Steel head.
Okay.
But the head won't make any difference. This is the tappets, and the tap,
Okay.
because it's a flat tappet engine, and flat
Right.
tappet engines are not de rigueur these days. So the manufacturers are not making oils, generally speaking, that will protect flat tappets.
I have a question too. Has everyone just about done, the oil filter conversion? So it's a spin-on oil filter?
I've got them on all mine.
I've done them on mine.
Not me. My car is totally original.
Me too.
Same here.
It's not
Same
that
here, still the old fashioned kind.
So Norm, it sounds like not everyone's done it.
Oh, okay.
I have. It's worked
Yeah.
out well for me.
Well, I said, what are 3 things you can do to a Healey and not affect its value? It says spin-on oil filter, gear-driven starter, and let me see, what was it? What was the third item to do? Oh, electronic ignition. So
They're
I've done those 3 things. I've had no issues whatsoever.
Those are all easily reversible too,
Yeah.
Norm,
Yeah.
if someone had a real issue with it. But yeah, I mean, I've never seen anyone complain about that on Bring a Trailer. They complain about a lot of other things, but I've never seen anyone complain about a spin-on oil filter.
Those changes do inevitably affect your value. I mean, if you really put your car up for sale, if you're looking for somebody's concours, looking for a car that's correct, those things would not be correct.
You're right.
That affects your value. That's the
Mine's a driver.
The difference between a high value car and a low value car is all in the details. So that's just a comment.
No, you're absolutely right, Robert. If someone wants a concourse car, and obviously if you do concourse, and again, if you were going to any conclaves or next year at Enclave 2022, when we do concourse there, if you have a spin-on oil filter or a different starter motor with high torque starters, you're right, you would deduct points. You're absolutely right. But I would say 90% or more of our cars, our Healey's, are drivers.
Yeah.
And you're looking for reliability, not for concours.
The issue of putting electronic ignition in your car is also a debatable issue, whether that's a benefit or not. Some very knowledgeable people say you're better off just leaving points in your car because they're easily serviceable, they're inexpensive, they're reliable generally, and all of that. So there's 2 points of view. That's all.
I just went back to points on my BJ8 when Bob Abbott rebuilt that motor and Rob redid my distributor. We went back to points. I didn't notice the electronic ignition made it any better, but some people swear by it.
Problem with an electronic ignition is when it fails, when you're halfway to east, wherever, and you don't have a spare, you're really in trouble.
Yep. I carried a spare Pertronics in my boot before, and now I just carry a spare set of points.
Yeah.
Okay. So Andy, any other questions you have?
No, but I can relate an experience that with a clutch problem that I resolved. Might I share that for a moment?
Sure.
All right. Well, quite a few episodes ago on call-ins, my clutch, I'd push down on the pedal, maybe halfway down or so, it would stop. It almost felt like it was hitting something mechanical. Then I would release the clutch and maybe try it again, and the clutch would go all the way down. This kept happening periodically. I couldn't find any rhyme or reason. What it ultimately turned out to be is the clutch slave cylinder hose was collapsing. And that's why it wasn't repeatable.
Okay.
And I'll give the guys at the British car specialist out in Norm Knockland, as soon as I described the conditions, that's what they said it was. And sure enough, I looked at the old hose and it was not good. So I also got their little addition so that you can bleed the slave cylinder from underneath the car. Because right now the choice is either pull out the interior or take the slave cylinder off and then, clamp the rod so it doesn't scoot out. And the device that they have it's pretty good. It brings it down below, which makes it really much easier to bleed. The one thing is it will not clamp per the fitting supplied to the transmission. It's supposed to go through a bolt hole, but it just won't quite fit. So you just rig up a little alternative to do that, maybe some safety wire or something so that it won't vibrate. Anyway, that's experience. If you have a clutch, it doesn't work. And
Thanks, Andy.
be sure and bleed your clutch and brakes. I was surprised at how much better it performed after I replaced all the fluid. Guess I hadn't done that in a while.
Great. Thank you. Jeff Farley, are you on? I see we have a Jeff on. Jeff Farley, you on?
I'm unmuting myself and now you can look at me.
Great. Well, thank you, Jeff. So Jeff's got some challenging issues with his oil pressure. You want to just give an update as it relates to what you're experiencing, Jeff?
Well, and even an update on my evidence. I recently had an experience where the oil pressure gauge quite abruptly started reading much higher and much lower than it ever has after having quite a few years of pretty healthy oil pressure. I was out on the highway and when I stopped the car, it went down to maybe 10 pounds, much lower than usual. And then when I revved it a little bit to bring it back home, it was going all the way over the high side of the gauge. So indicating I've got simultaneously too much oil pressure and too little. So after a lot of head scratching, and I did get a mechanic to measure it at the engine, he said it's producing oil pressure just fine down there, but for some reason didn't do what I wanted him to do, which was to disconnect the pipe that feeds the oil pressure gauge. And so I brought it home and we managed to get that apart today, put the pipe into a container and crank the engine over to see how much oil is coming out, and it's barely a dribble. So now I kind of think that I've got some obstruction in that copper tube that comes up from the engine to the gauge. And I was just about to order a new tube and a new flex pipe and put it in there thinking either if it can't be blown out that the new tube should cure it. I'm wondering if there's anything else logically to do before that step.
But that tube is already attached directly to the gauge. Don't you need to get the entire system? You can't get just the tube, Jeff?
Yeah, you can buy just a new tube.
Okay.
Separate from the gauge. It threads onto the back of the gauge and then it threads onto the engine via another flex pipe, and both of those parts. So I can get the flex pipe and the copper tube, and that's what we disconnected from the gauge. But kind of to see if there should be oil, I believe, pumping out of the end of that tube, and it was just barely a dribble. So I don't think that gauge. Don't think the gauge is getting oil.
Sorry.
So if it's not getting oil, how does it go to high pressure?
Well, my thinking is that maybe there's something in the tube that is obstructing it enough that when I turn on the engine, it used to show about 20, 30 pounds just from cranking before it would start. So it's very low. Even when it gets running, it's very low. It builds pressure according to the gauge quite gradually. But I'm wondering if it's partially obstructed, if it reads too low at a low pressure, but then gets to be such a high reading when a little bit of oil is getting in there that actually the pressure is excessive according to what inside the tube. Maybe that pressure could be excessive so that the gauge is accurate, but it's only reflecting what's happening in the tube and not the engine.
My sense is that you got a bad gauge.
Yeah.
Yes, but if you well, is there? I've never heard of a bad gauge that could read too high and too low both.
Well, once they start doing something funny, they do funny things. You know, they go wild. All our gauges fail over time. You know, yours is ready to fail if it hasn't yet.
But I'm wondering, shouldn't I see oil coming? Because I had a situation once before where that connection came loose off the gauge, and it quite quickly covered my jeans.
Yeah.
Fortunately warm and not hot oil. So it was pumping out of that tube when it was working correctly. Screwed it back together several years ago and never had a problem. Now there's nothing coming out of that tube when I turn over the engine.
Comment.
Yes, please.
If your oil pressure is reading higher than you've ever seen before,
yes,
almost certainly the fault is the oil pressure relief valve.
That was the next culprit that I was going to go after.
If your oil pressure relief valve is jamming in the bore, almost certainly the cause is tappets. Your valve lifters are starting to shed metal and they are jamming the oil pressure relief valve. Bad, bad news. The car that Rick Neville has in his background, we ran into that at Targa, Newfoundland. And we had to flush the engine completely to get oil out of it, get all the little bits of metal out, and it lasted another half a day before the engine let go. It is a real common problem. You need to try the old magnet trick on the oil pan, on the sump drain plug. I'll bet you've got little shards of steel in your engine.
Well, in the process of having the oil pressure measured, the mechanic did change the oil and looked at the old oil, and he was looking for maybe some dilution and everything, but he didn't also say anything that there was any. But what you're saying is, unless it was clinging to a magnet, it wouldn't be evident.
That's correct. You'll probably not see it if you just drain the oil. You literally do have to have a magnet to collect it, and it is a horrible mess in the engine. It's everywhere in the engine.
But if that is after the fact, how do I do that now? If I put a magnetic plug back in there and run it long enough to show any wear, isn't it going to continue doing whatever damage it's doing already?
Well, it's done anyway. Put a magnetic plug in, drive it around the block a couple of times, take the plug out and see if there's fur on the plug.
So if my engine is full of metal, then that's not a good sign.
No.
Now, if can that be cured by pulling the head before it does anything worse?
Yep.
I mean, you could get at the tappets by pulling the cylinder head off, and
but the oil will be inside the crankshaft. It'll be all through the oil galleries. The metal will be everywhere in the engine, and even though you try to flush it out, it'll just keep occurring and it'll ruin the bearings. Bad news, but that's the fact of the matter.
But now, is this something that could be a very abrupt failure? I was driving down the highway and it was fine, and then suddenly
the oil can be floating, the metal can be floating around for a while until it suddenly finds its way to the oil pressure relief valve, and then it starts jamming it and everything goes haywire.
But another piece of evidence would be if I change the oil pressure relief valve and the behavior improves, at least I know that the first problem is being caused by that pressure relief valve.
Yeah, even just take it out and clean it and see if everything's okay for the first few seconds.
Yes, and so it is possible that could be jammed for other reasons than the disastrous tappet problem.
Unlikely. I've never heard of it anything other than the steel from tappets.
Steel from tappets, but would that also account for excessively low pressure at idle?
Yes, the valve can either jam closed or jam open.
But can it be both? Because I'm going from low pressure when I start the car to excessively high when I drive it.
Yeah, if the valve is jammed,
Yes,
it could be jammed at a set position.
so it's both too high, too low.
Yeah, at low speed, there's not enough oil to do it, and high speed, it can't relieve the pressure, so it goes high. It sure sounds like a jammed oil pressure relief valve to me.
But if my mechanic at the engine side has seen sufficient oil pressure, but how would that be possible if it's okay at the engine but not at the gauge?
So he put a separate gauge on that without
Apparently
using the-
down on the block, he measured and he said it's reading about 20 pounds higher than my gauge was off the block, but he didn't really address the excessive oil pressure situation.
For me, it's the excessive oil pressure that is the indicator that you've got a problem.
But nevertheless, indicator of immediately the valve and maybe the cause for that.
It's the valve that controls the oil pressure.
The valve does. So it could account for excessively high, excessively low. So
Exactly.
the next step is to replace that or clean the valve. I have a new part. So if that, or if the other one will it become evident if it's stuck when it's removed, the original one?
Yes, normally you'll find bits of metal, particularly if you put a little magnet on a stick down inside the valve and pull it out, see if you get furries on it.
Oh, so it would be up, obviously the metal should be interfering with that as well as
Exactly.
the rest of the engine.
Yep.
Okay, not the answer I wanted to hear. But,
Sorry about that.
But let's say I put the magnetic plug on, no evidence of metal floating around the engine. Then just blame the valve.
Change the valve and change the line, the flex line going to the oil pressure gauge. It does occasionally give trouble if it's an
Flex
original.
and the copper. I was thinking of
I would
replacing
change the
both
copper.
flex.
The copper doesn't give problems.
So maybe the flex only.
The flex can collapse inwards.
Oh, could collapse. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And then do all this and then pray.
Yeah.
But, so Jeff, you should be able to buy a magnet that you can put right inside that pressure relief valve chamber.
Oh,
then
you mean just what type of a magnet? I haven't had that. Here's my other question. If I remove we were talking about, I don't have a spin on. I've got the canister style oil filter. If I pull all that off and the filter, is that valve that's immediately accessible to me in the block, or where is that valve?
The oil pressure relief valve.
Yes.
It's on. There's a inch and I think it's an inch and an eighth or an inch and a 16th hexagonal plug on the right side of the engine, I believe, if I remember correctly, low down near the bottom of the block. And you just undo that and unscrew it. A spring will come out, and then you can put a little dinghy, put something in there and pull the valve itself out. The valve's like a little thimble.
Yeah, I got the valve and I can see the new one. So in other words, it has nothing to do with the oil filter assembly.
No.
Okay, so I can leave that alone and check the valve.
Well, if you take the oil filter off and you wash you got a regular cartridge type filter. If you
Yes.
wash it down very, very carefully in Vasol, you might find steel fragments in that. It'll be an indicator as well.
Well, unfortunately, I believe the mechanic put a new filter in the canister, so maybe all my evidence has gone to the
Maybe,
recyclers by now.
maybe, yeah.
Well,
But
time
nevertheless-
out just for a second here. Check that canister. There's a way to put the parts in it wrong. There's a couple washers in there, and if you get them in the wrong order, it will do flaky things. And if
But
your
mine was
mechanic-
doing flaky things before the filter was changed, and it didn't change after he changed the filter. So,
Okay,
I
just a
don't think
reminder.
that's it. Yeah.
Just
no,
a reminder to watch the way those go back together, because it
All
can
right.
affect your oil pressure and make it
Yeah,
go
no,
up and down
no,
and stuff.
Nothing like that was changed before the problem suddenly occurred
Mhm.
where, but yeah, okay. Very good. Not the answer I wanted to hear. I can't kick it, but nevertheless, on the right track, that it's maybe the gauge, maybe the oil pressure relief valve, and the cause of all that, who knows what.
Or maybe that tube, that flexi tube has collapsed,
flex
as Michael has mentioned as well. I mean, obviously that would be the better choice. But again, if you're getting that magnet, you can go inside that chamber. You can see if you see any fragments of steel in there.
Well, and I think I have a magnetic drain plug that I purchased a while ago. And the last 2 or 3 times the car has been serviced, I've asked the mechanics, please remember to put this new plug in, and they keep forgetting it. It's still sitting on my package shelf. So just putting that in, catching the oil, the new oil, pouring it back in the engine and driving for a little bit might give us some So what you're saying is if this is actually happening, there's no shortage of this kind of debris. It's going to keep producing it until it's catastrophic failure.
Unfortunately.
But how do you then know how far this might have gone? You then pull the pan, look at the bearings, and if nothing's wrong there, then pull the head and look at the tappets. Are the tappets visible with the valve cover?
Once you've got a degree of steel fragments floating around in the engine needs to be rebuilt. That's all there is to it.
All right. Well, hope not to
And
find
Michael,
out.
both ends, both the top and the bottom end?
Probably the top will be all right, but you have to clean out the rocker shaft, but the bottom end will be where the problems are. The oil pump will be probably ruined. Certainly the bearings will be ruined.
But this
Can
means
bearings-
it is because that the tappets failed.
Yeah, the tappets fail. These tiny little flakes of steel just go right through the engine.
And is there something that could have been done previously to prevent tappet failure?
That's the big question I'm dealing with at the moment with my 100. You know, having taken all the precautions I could have to prevent it with VR1 and everything else, and a new cam, a new old stock cam, and a set of new old stock lifters, and it still failed.
And so you've got the exact issue that I'm looking at.
Yep, for a
How's
small
your-
degree, very small.
How's your oil pressure? How was your oil pressure?
It wasn't so bad that the oil pressure was starting to be affected. It's when I took out the sump plug to drain the oil, a magnetic sump plug to drain the oil, that it was all furry.
Okay, no, that's okay. That's a fairly easy drive, and at least to change plugs, to run it a little while, and to see. So within a few minutes of idling, it's going to throw metal on.
No, I drive it around so you slosh the oil around in the engine a little.
And so if this has already happened, it's not going to hurt to drive it for a few blocks.
I don't think so. I think
Bring it up.
the horse has left.
Or not. We'll find out. Okay, thank you so much for that one.
Yeah.
No one has suggested this to me. The forums, no one suggested this to me. So
Well, Jeff, I wish we had better news for you. So hopefully it will be, you
well,
might
maybe
luck out, but
a better diagnosis than I've had. So
I'd like to interject something if you can hear me.
please, and I say I'm praying for an interjection.
I've just bought my third Healy, which is 104. I haven't had a Healy since 85, 86 actually, when I sold my last BJ8. But I was doing a lot of sailboats. And it's common practice when you buy a new used boat, to have the oil analyzed. And they can tell you when you have it analyzed what's wearing by the different types of metal that are in the oil.
Yes.
It's not an expensive test. So, you might want to just go ahead and do that.
So just drain off a pint or something and take it in?
Send it off to the lab. If you contact any marine surveyor in your area, they should be able to tell you where you can get the oil analyzed.
Well, I'm landlocked, but maybe shouldn't any engine shop be also able to do the same thing?
You can get on the phone and contact a marine surveyor in Newport or in Connecticut, or no matter where you are.
Well, in my case, maybe Vancouver, because I'm in Western Canada.
Well,
But at any rate, why is, I don't want to take more time, but why is it something that a marine mechanic would do that a regular engine builder would do?
yeah, but there are places that I'm sure you can get it done.
They're just an oil test. Okay.
You can use Blackstone Industries. Just Google Blackstone for oil samples. I use them for boats, aircraft, all kinds of things.
I bet. And maybe Mike could help me. Is there anyone that does this in Canada, at least that you know of?
They do it for Canada. They send you a little sample container.
Oh, that's not into Canada.
You mail it in. It goes through regular mail.
Okay.
I have a Caterpillar engine in the boat, and every time I change the oil, I send in one of the little I put some
Specimen
oil in
bottles,
one of the
huh?
little cups, seal it up, put it in the mail, and they send me a report every time I change the oil. It's standard
right.
procedure with a Caterpillar.
Okay. I see it up
And
here,
it
Blackstone.
It should be
Labs,
easily done.
They got boats and planes and maybe trains, automobiles on it. So okay. Thank you so much. This has really been worthwhile and dug in much deeper than what I could find through multiple
A
mechanics.
question for Michael. Where do you get a magnetic plug? Is that through Moss or something?
I make my own. I take the standard plug. I make up a little piece of threaded rod that's about 1/4 inch long. Then I get a rare earth magnet, which is a small puck about a quarter of an inch in diameter or an eighth of an inch thick. You can buy them by the 100 for about $3. And I stick that onto the top of the little metal piece in the hollowed out plug. Then I fill it with JB Weld. And then that's my magnetic oil plug.
And just as an aside, I think the one I have, I believe it was from AH in England. I believe it's a magnetic plug. I think they do supply them for.
I'll go and get one to show you.
Yeah, they do. Now, we're going to keep this call going on. So Rick's going to take over. I have another call starting at 8 o'clock. So I'm going to bow out, but Rick's going to take over. So Rick, in terms of the other calls that we have, so Penny's got a question on hers, as well as Robert Scalia has got a question on his as well. And I forward those questions to you in advance, Rick. Rick, you're on mute. It doesn't show you're on mute, but we can't hear you. Rick, we're not hearing you.
Turn up your volume on your computer.
How about now?
Yep, we got you, Rick.
Okay.
So I'm going to bow out. Hopefully everyone's doing very well. We hope to see you in Newport next month. And we will again have this call the second Monday of September, and the week before Healy's at Newport in Summit 2021. And so hope you have a good rest of the call, and we will talk to you next month.
Thank
Take
you.
care. Thank you. See you, Steve. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Can we get one more question on that oil pressure?
Go ahead.
On the oil pressure, has anybody come up with a electronic sensor for the oil pressure and the thermostat to get rid of the tubes and the wire?
Why would you
You
want
can get rid of the, go ahead.
why would you want to do that if it works so good? Like
Well,
ours?
mine isn't working, and I'm thinking it'd be a lot easier to replace it, just taking out the plugs and going up with just some wires as opposed to all the tubes and so forth.
They work perfect the way they are.
Okay,
All right, we have gone from the organized portion of the meeting to the disorganized part, because I don't remember the things that Peter sent to me. So I'm going to call ladies first, and Penny, go ahead.
Well, I've
Penny?
been one of the lurkers for many months, so I appreciate you having these Zoom calls, because I'm actually in Maryland, and I bought my Healy in 2019, and I sent it to K&T Best Restorations just to have them check it out. I got it home, and then COVID hit. So I've been playing with it ever since. And I'm now down to cosmetic issues. I replaced the carpet in it over the past month. And of course, one thing leads to another. I pulled the carpet, I pulled the underlayment, I put Dynamat in it. I got the carpet in it, and I decided to replace my seat slides. And I got new seat slides from AH Spares, and I installed them. And I put the T-nuts in tight. And then I installed my seats on top of it, and the seat slides don't catch. So I'm wondering, is there a trick to this, or do I have bad seat slides? Because no matter what I do, these slides, the seat just moves forward and backwards and doesn't catch at all. So I don't know if I've installed the seat sides, the T-nuts too tight, the top nuts that hold the seat to the slides too tight, or if I have bad slides.
Can I ask, this is a 6-cylinder, of course, you're talking about, correct?
Yeah, it's a BT7 tri-car.
BT7, yeah, okay. The seat slides, the seat as it is, the seat just slides backwards forwards, no restriction. Is that correct? The only thing that locks it is that handle on one of the slides. I presume
Right.
one of them has the handle on it.
Yes.
That's correct. That handle is it is spring loaded to push into a groove in the slide, right?
Right.
So what I think you're describing is that the handle is not moving to push. Right?
It moves, but once it moves and I move the seat, if nobody's sitting in the seat, it just moves back and forth. It won't catch. It's like it doesn't catch the dimple where it.
Yeah, it sounds to me as something's restricting the movement of the peg. Sounds like that to me. And you might, if you can look at it pretty closely when you take the seat cushion out, can't you?
Yes.
You can, yeah. So it would appear to me that the handle needs to be pulled back in the opposite direction of where you normally would move it to release the seat as you slide the seat, and it should probably clink into the hole. Is it to try doing that?
I have, they just won't clink. They just keep,
Really?
I mean, they move forward and backward and won't catch at all. So I'm
Sounds
wondering.
to me
if
like the slides, something's not made correctly, because it should click into a groove
That's
when you
what I
go by.
thought. Okay.
Yeah. Call Mr. AH Spares.
All right, I sent an email, so I just wondered if I tightened them down too tight or if I did something wrong.
Now, I think if they're sliding backwards and forwards, you haven't tightened them down too tight.
You wanna
Okay,
make- Yeah, you want to make sure you have the spring on correctly, and it's pulling it into this where it needs to go.
well, it's one assembly, so I don't put the spring on it. It all came as one assembly.
Oh, okay. Spring action is working well,
Yes,
but it's just not catching.
it's
Yeah.
not catching at all.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Could need a Dremel tool with a little, to make it so it works better, but that's,
I thought about that, but I thought maybe before I took the Dremel tool to it, I thought I would check before I started destroying something.
yeah, that's a good idea. Check.
Very wise.
Yeah. All right, well, thank you, everyone.
Okay, we had another question that Peter mentioned. Who was that, please?
It was me. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, well, let's see. I'm changing my, I'm working on my Sprite, my bug eye. I'm changing the rear wheel cylinders. I did one of them this afternoon, and boy, they're a pain to put on. And when I pull, you got to pull the axle shaft out a little bit, because you need every bit of space you can to get that piece in there. And when I pulled the axle shaft out, like oil came out, and I'm thinking that it shouldn't have any oil behind there. So isn't that the case?
No, that's not the case. There should be oil in there. There's a reservoir formed by the end face of the axle and the hub itself. And if you'll notice that the seal is inboard of the bearing, correct?
Right.
So you've got a gasket and sometimes an O-ring between the axle flange and the hub. That forms a seal. And
Yes.
then there's the bearing, and then there's a seal inboard of that. And it's actually meant to have oil in there. It's what keeps that bearing lubricated.
Oh, okay. I was worried that I had to replace the axle seals because, they're leaking into that area. But
Just don't get on the right shoes.
should I replace the gasket?
Probably should at this stage, because it very likely is ripped.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's helpful, because I put one on, and then I thinking, if I got to replace the seal, I got to take this thing right back off, and there's no sense in putting the other one on if I got to take them both off. And so maybe I can go ahead and put the other one on. That's helpful. A couple other questions. On my Sprite, I don't have this car very long, just a few months. And it has a ballast resistor located right next to the coil. And, I've never seen one before on a Sprite, and I wasn't quite sure why it was there. And I read up on ballast resistors, and I guess they maybe put them on the very late cars, and it had something to do with being able to use a lower voltage coil. So there was a lot of reserve, something like that. But, my coil is a standard coil. I think it's the same one we use on all of our Sprites and all the big Healeys as well. It's a Lucas 101. It's a number 101 or whatever. And it's
Are you
not
sure it's a ballast? What makes you think it's a ballast resistor?
Well, there's this white ceramic plate right next to the coil. And then it's got a wire connected to one end, and then there's a wire connected to the other end. And then there's
that's a ballast resistor. If you've got a 101 coil, it shouldn't have a ballast resistor.
Right. That's what I'm thinking. And so I think it was put on there erroneously, or maybe there was a different coil at some point or something. And so I need to remove it, because wouldn't it affect the performance of my car?
It probably would. And you should, before you remove it, you should just check the resistance or the impedance of the coil. You can find data on the internet about the impedance of a ballast resistor coil and a non-ballast resistor coil. I think it's 3.1 for a non-ballast. Just make sure that your coil matches a non-ballast resistor coil impedance.
Yeah, I checked that already. And the one that I use is the Lucas 101, and it's listed as a, it's not a, and then they listed another model as a ballast resistant one. So, you know, you have to differentiate clearly. And
You're on the right track, take it out.
Yeah, so I just have to, take that out. It's kind of ugly there. I've never seen one on a Sprite, really. And, you know, it's in the way of getting at to the distributor and stuff. And so, you know, I have 2 wires connected to them. I got to figure out what to do with those 2 wires.
Join them together.
Oh, yeah? Okay.
Right.
All right. Does that sound right to everybody? Just join them together?
Yep.
Okay.
Well, you can take the hot one and plug it straight onto the distributor.
Okay. All right.
Oh, sorry, straight onto the coil. Yeah.
As I'm going into my car, you know, it's my new car and I'm going through it. You know, I keep running into gaskets everywhere. And, you know, we were talking about gaskets earlier. It's interesting, the controversy about gasket sealer. You know, for instance, I had my carburetors off. And when you know, I just put them all back together at the end with there's 6 of these little carburetor gaskets, you know. They're oval shaped things, and I put it all back together. And then I looked at my Chilton manual, and it said you're supposed to use sealer on both sides of all of those gaskets. And I thought, oh no, you know. So I pulled the carburetors back off, but I left the bottom, the manifold on, which is a good thing because I really didn't need to take any of it off, is what I realized. You know, then I went searching and asking for opinions, and man, there's a lot of opinions about gasket sealer. Some people say never use it, never use it. Some people say, you know, only put it on one side. Some people, you know, it depends on where you're using it and all of that and what kind of sealer to use. And there's, you know, it's really amazing. But anyhow, I just thought I'd throw that out.
You're right. There is
Okay,
a lot
thank
of.
you. Do we have any
opinions
other
on gaskets.
questions?
I've got
Do we
a
have any other
question.
questions for the student?
I've got a question.
And who are you?
I'm David Mall, and I just took possession of a 1956 BN2 that has a sorted past, but it has a engine that was rebuilt using all Dennis Welsh parts: head, roller rockers, billet crank, rods, pistons, everything's bounced, 10-to-1 compression ratio. And it's running a little rough, so I just got into the carburetors today. Literally, I just took delivery of this car last Monday. So I'm just starting to sort it out. The choke cable, I just finished reinstalling that because it was bent up. And I'm looking at the lead on it, the way it leads to the linkage at the bottom of the carburetor for the jets, where it moves the jets up and down. And it doesn't look quite right. It's leading at a really weird angle. And I know there's some parts in there that are shiny metal parts that are not the old brass or bronze parts, and you know, they're not original. So I'm questioning the lead on this choke cable. If I turn it around, you know, so that there's a little stainless steel rod spring, actually, it's bent, and the choke cable goes down in the center of that, and then that attaches to the 2 levers at the bottom with little screws. If I turn the screws around so that the cable feeds on the other side, it'll have a cleaner feed, but it's going to be next to impossible to attach the screws, to tighten the screws down. Anybody with 104 experience have any idea what's going on here? You know,
What you're describing does sound like an original choke mechanism. It has like a U bracket with a little eye in the center.
Yep.
And then
Yep.
there are 2 trunnions, as they're called, which one goes onto each choke arm. And then the cable itself goes through that little eye, and it has another trunnion on it. That's the original system.
Okay. Now this car was originally just a 104 car, and they put larger carburetors on it. They're ACU 6040s X. And from the research I've done, the X seems to indicate they came off a Jaguar, probably a 120 or something. Are you familiar with that, or?
No, I'm not.
Yeah, because I was going to go ahead and order a rebuild kit, but after
Are they 1 3/4 carburetors?
they're 1 3/4. As far as
Yeah.
I hear the approach, but according to the numbers on the carburetor, it's supposed to be 1 3/4.
Yeah. Yeah, they should work all right. You'll have to have the correct needles, obviously, and the correct springs, but you should actually be able to make them work all right. That's the nice thing about air shoes. They are very infinitely adjustable.
I just got into it tonight. I synced the carburetors. You know, there were the sink was way out on the carburetor, so I got down. I cleaning the K&N filters, wait for them to dry, so I can take it out tomorrow and see how it runs. But it's you know, it's got a high performance cam. It's got some really nice high performance parts in it, and I want to get it right because I know it's not right now. So
Yeah.
that's my goal at this point.
You should probably start trying to set it up to around to 100M specs.
Well,
100M's use 1 3/4 carburetors. So if you use the needles and the springs out of 100M, it would be a good starting point.
okay. Now, the car was at one point sold to a gentleman as a 100M car. And it actually was whoever restored it tried to pass it off as a 100M, and they stamped some numbers in the louvered hood that are the wrong font and such, and on the engine block. So when I bought it, I realized it wasn't a 100M. It's a 104, but it's got a completely rebuilt engine with all Dennis Welch stuff in it. So, you know, I bought it knowing that. But I was thinking, has anybody had any information on or familiar with a company down in Norfolk, Virginia called Abacus Racing? They were recommended. I'm in Slower Delaware, in the Rehoboth Beach area. And I had a gentleman down here who had recommended them. And we were recently at the MG international meeting in Atlantic City. And there was a gentleman there with a TD who had some problems coming up through Norfolk. And he stopped there, and he said they treated him really well. So my thought was in the winter, I'd take it down there and have them do a tune-up on it and a dyno on it to find out exactly what this engine is really putting out. Some people have claimed it's putting out close to 200 horsepower. I find that probably a bit of an exaggeration, but I would like to find out what it's actually producing. So I think it's got I'm not sure if it's a race cam in it or just a high performance road cam, but I've got it idling now, probably about 800 RPMs, which seems like it's a sweet spot on it, you know. But we'll see.
Was this car offered on Bring? Was
Excuse
this
me?
car on Bring a Trailer at one time?
Not that I know of.
Was this car sold? Yeah, this sounds real familiar about a car that was on there about a year or two ago. And they were claiming it had 200 horsepower and it was on them, and obviously it wasn't. And
What color was it?
sounds awful familiar.
Color was it? Do you remember?
I want to think it was red.
No, this is
Red?
Old English white with the black codes.
Yeah, probably a different car.
Um,
There's no shortage of fake 100Ms out there, that's for sure.
yeah, the car was
They
originally,
say of the 500,
excuse me?
they say of the 540 original 100Ms, 1,020 have survived, so.
Paid 640, but there's 1,000 of them out there. The car was
Yeah.
originally by a gentleman, an attorney up in New Jersey, Peter Efros, and he rallied the car extensively. He did the New England 1000 and the Mountain Millie and also the Amelia Island rally. So some of your people up there might be familiar with it. I think it ran the New England rally at least twice, maybe more.
Well, good luck with it. Sounds like it should go really well.
Well-
Once you get it sorted.
Trying to sort it out now, little by little. And we'll see. Got the transmission completely rebuilt. So that's shifting nicely now. And just work through some little odds and ends here and see what I can do.
Well, good luck.
Thank
Any
you.
other questions?
Yeah, I'd like to
welcome.
make an addition to my earlier comments. Have we got any Sprite guys here? You know, everybody's been trying to convert their cars to discs in the front. And, you know, the problem we've come up with is the rear brakes don't match. And it's because of the bore on our wheel cylinders and all that. So I found a way to make a really simple solution to what's been a problem for a lot of people, because when you change over the backs, they're going to later backing plates and all of that, because it matches up to a 3/4 inch bore. And so the solution is from Mini Mania, you can get Morris Minor rear wheel cylinders that are 3/4 inch bore. A lot of people don't realize that they made them, but they bolt up perfectly to our original back plates and everything, because they're an exact match to what we have. Instead of the 7/8 inch bore, they have a 3/4 inch bore. And that's all we need to do to make the conversion, where everybody else needs to change the back plates and pull the bearings and all of that in order to do the conversion. So it's a simple way to go. And I changed one of them today, and it's an exact match. I may do the other one later tonight. So I wanted to throw that out there because it's, I think, a really helpful thing to know.
Now,
That's good. There's been a lot of issues with people changing over and doing the disc brake conversions and. You know,
Yeah, I've been working on researching it a lot. The issue is that we're changing the discs in the front, which use a 3/4 inch bore. Then we change our master cylinders to a 3/4 inch bore. Then you need to change your rear wheel cylinders as well to a 3/4 inch bore, so that everything works. Because when we just do the front ones and leave the back ones the way they are, your back brakes aren't working. And so, you know, it's important that you kind of get the concept and make sure your car, you know, that your brakes work.
Let me tell you, if you've got 7/8 wheel cylinders in the rear, and you are putting, you're putting 3/4 wheel cylinders in the rear, you will have less braking in the rear than you had originally. Now,
Yeah,
why are you changing them?
So that it'll be balanced.
Yeah, but how do you know they're imbalanced?
Because they were designed from the factory to be in balance with everybody having 3/4 inch bores.
The best way to find out if they're balanced is you drive down a dry paved road and you slam your foot on the brakes and see if all four wheels lock up. That's where you got to start.
I don't know.
And if you spin 180 degrees, you've got too much brake in the back.
No, front.
Oh, back.
Or probably, yeah. Depends. Yeah, but it's not as simple as just reading the book about it, really.
Well, it seems as though you know, everybody who changes their car to discs in the front, you know, then has to deal with their back brakes. And you know, otherwise,
So they're saying they have too much back brake.
that the back brakes should start working.
No. Are you saying that the people who change the front discs, the people at front discs, they're saying they don't have back brakes, they're not working?
I think that.
Now you'd actually would have too much back brake if you've got 7/8 cylinders.
Let's see. Yeah, that's. Well, let's see. 7/8. Yeah.
They'd lock up first.
Yeah. Well, I don't know.
Yeah.
I understand that you can't mix. You start mixing 7/8 and 3/4 spores on your system. And it's never, it was never intended to work that way, and things are not going to work correctly. That's what I've been advised very strongly by, Steve Bell and other people who seem to be knowing what they're talking about. And a whole lot of people have prescribed to this, that's a problem and it's an issue that needs to be solved.
Sure.
And so this is my solution to an issue. I'm certainly not, an engineer that I understand, but this is what I understand from everybody. So that's where I'm at.
Well, report back to us and let us know how it works.
Wouldn't you want more braking power on your disc brakes because your weight transfer to the front? Or should it be more like 60-40?
That's how it's supposed to be. Yeah.
It's a totally, the front disc brakes operate entirely different from drum brakes. So if you've got a disc brake, for a certain amount of brake line pressure, the brake will provide so much torque onto the wheel. It'll stop it. And what they do is that it gets very complicated, but you actually have to try and balance it to the point where all four wheels lock up together. That's theoretically the idea. Right. But it's not quite as easy as just changing a few wheel cylinders and playing around with it. That's why they have balance valves in race cars.
Okay.
This 100 car that I just purchased has the disc brake conversion on the front, and I had to take it through an inspection down here in Delaware. And one of the things they check is they have you drive forward to a set of 4 pads, and then they signal you to hit the brakes to see if you're braking with all 4 wheels. And I believe he told me he passed it. I believe he told me it was 60-40.
Yep. Yeah, could well be. Yeah. But it's not as simple as just 60-40.
Okay.
What I understand, the issue is that the old drum brakes in the front had 2 wheel cylinders and 1 in the back. And, that was how it was set up to work. And as soon as we changed to the disc in the front, now we only have a single cylinder in front and a single in the back. And that's not how they're made to work. And so the pressure was all off and out of balance.
Yeah.
That's how I understood it.
Yeah. Good luck.
Right, we have any questions?
Your brakes, not mine.
Got a question for Mike on carburetors.
Go ahead.
With the, I've got a BJ8, and I never clean or drain the float bowls on those carburetors because there's no drain on the bottom and you couldn't get at it if there was. So has anybody come up with anything clever to clean the crud out of the bottom of the float bowl aside from taking the whole darn thing apart?
Can you get the float chamber lids off?
Yeah, well, yeah, you got to take it all apart.
It's tight because of the choke mechanism, but if you can get the float chamber lids off, then you get your air gun and go on each cylinder and it's done. It's that easy. You literally just blow it out. And then you've got to put the lids back on, which is always a challenge because you've got to remove that stupid choke linkage thing.
Yeah, right.
It's not easy,
no.
But you don't need to clean out the float chambers very much. They stay pretty clean. The jet is actually quite large, and the only thing that'll get into the float chambers on a BJ8 will be a particle that is small enough to go through that little gauze on the intake. And anything that's small enough to go through that little gauze on the intake will go right through the jet and into the engine.
Oh, what about water getting in there?
It'll work its way through. It'll come out. It'll just go through. The engine may not run too well, but it'll go through. The fuel goes out of the bottom of the float chamber, so it takes everything with it.
Well, I almost never clean them out for that reason, and it's still running. So,
Any other questions? Bob Abbott, do you want to bring up your questions? Bob, are you still here? Okay.
I need to hang on to my cylinders that I'm taking off just in case I have to put them back on, huh?
Always keep all your parts
Yeah.
until you're sure.
Yep, all right.
I've got another question for carburetors. The dash pot oil, what weight? I just put 2040 in there. Any suggestions on that other than the SU oil?
There's another question that's commonly debated. A lot of people use transmission fluid, but it's what works for you, really.
Okay. And at what level, if I recall from years ago, and I may not recall correctly, you filled them up so that when you put the little rods with the pistons on them, that they contacted the oil and the rod was a half an inch, 3/4 inch above the top of the dash pot. Does that sound
That's
correct?
about right. It's about right.
I'm not sure how good my memory was since it's been, 30, 40 years since I last had a carburetor apart. Thank you.
All right, if there are no more questions, then we will bring tonight's meeting to an end. I want to thank again Michael Salter for joining us on our team. He's always very helpful, and I would appreciate and everyone attending Summit that has got their registrations in, and we look forward to seeing everyone there. And we hope you all have a good evening and join us for our next call, and that'll be publicized. Take care. Have a good evening, everyone.
Thanks, Rick. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
No.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, Rick. Well,